On a worn indigo cloth, a young Maasai woman in traditional red shuka robes lay motionless as the morning mist, cradling a lion cub against her chest. For 15 days, she had returned to this exact spot beneath the fever trees, becoming one with the earth itself. The golden cub had chosen her, climbing onto her with the fearless trust of the very young. But she wasn't alone. Emerging from the tall elephant grass, the lioness stood just meters away, amber eyes fixed and unblinking. As the cub purred against the stranger's heart, the mother began her approach. What happens when Africa's most feared predator stands within striking distance of the woman holding her young? And what she did next left the entire conservation team breathless. Before we continue, remember to share this story if it moves you, and stay with us for more tales from the wild heart of Africa. Of all the sounds that echoed across the vast Kenyan savanna, it was the unnatural silence that haunted Dr. James Kimathi most. It was a suffocating quiet that hung over the abandoned poaching camp like a curse, where even the wind seemed to hold its breath in horror. When he and his team from the Kenya Wildlife Service arrived at dawn, the only sound was the crunch of dried grass under their boots and the distant cry of a fish eagle over the Mara River. The tip had come from a reformed poacher, whispers of a trafficking ring that captured lions for the illegal trade in bones and cubs. The raid was swift but devastating. They found evidence of unthinkable cruelty, snares still stained with blood, cages that had held magnificent creatures in conditions that defied comprehension. But it was in the farthest corner of a makeshift thorn enclosure that they discovered her, the lioness. The prison was barely large enough for her massive frame, constructed from rusted metal and thorny branches. She lay pressed against the back, her golden coat dulled with dust and despair, ribs visible through matted fur. Her powerful body, built to rule the grasslands, trembled with a fear so deep it seemed to vibrate from her very soul. Her eyes stopped Kimathi cold. They held no trace of the fierce pride that should burn in a lioness's gaze. Instead, they were empty wells of trauma, ancient and hollow with a grief that seemed older than the baobab trees. Huddled against her belly, barely visible, was a single cub, a tiny ball of spotted gold, eyes still clouded with newborn blindness, breathing in shallow, desperate gasps. A thorough search revealed the heartbreaking truth: the scattered remains of 3 other cubs that hadn't survived the ordeal. This mother had watched her babies die, and something essential had broken inside her. When they carefully dismantled the thorn barrier, she didn't snarl or charge. She didn't even lift her massive head. She simply pressed herself deeper into the corner, a portrait of utter defeat. The Queen of Beasts had surrendered to despair. Transporting her to the Maasai Mara Conservation Trust was a delicate operation. She offered no resistance, her body limp with trauma, her spirit extinguished. The fight had gone out of her completely. At the conservation center, nestled in the rolling hills where acacia trees dotted the endless grassland, they were given the largest available enclosure. It was a slice of paradise: tall grasses, a seasonal stream, and shaded groves that mimicked the wild territories she should have roamed. It was a world away from the thorny prison, a place designed for healing under the vast African sky. The center's director, a wise Samburu elder named Leshan, watched them with ancient eyes that had seen too much suffering. "We'll call her Nayeli," he said in his native tongue, "the one who loves." His weathered face creased with sorrow. "And perhaps love will find her again." But Nayeli seemed beyond love's reach. She found the most secluded corner of the enclosure, a hidden grove beneath a cluster of wild sage, and vanished into the shadows. She wouldn't touch the fresh impala meat they provided. She wouldn't drink from the clear stream. Most heartbreaking of all, she wouldn't nurse her cub. The tiny male, whom the staff named Jengo, meaning building in Swahili, for their hope he would help rebuild his mother's heart, would cry out for her with plaintive mewls that echoed across the savannah. His desperate calls were answered only by silence. When instinct drove him toward his mother's hiding place, she would shrink away, recoiling from her own flesh and blood. It was the most unnatural thing Leshan had ever witnessed in his 60 years among the wildlife of East Africa. Trauma had severed the most sacred bond in the animal kingdom. The lioness, lost in her prison of fear, no longer recognized her own cub. Days stretched into 2 weeks. The staff hand-fed Django with a special formula, a heartbreaking necessity that drove him further from his wild heritage. Leshan knew time was running out. A lion cub raised by humans would never truly be wild, and a mother who rejected her young was a soul lost in the wasteland of her own shattered mind. That's when he made the call to the one person who might understand such profound brokenness. "Asha," he said into the satellite phone, his voice heavy with urgency. "I have a lioness and cub, and we're losing them both. I need your gift." Asha Mwangi arrived the next morning in a dust-covered Land Rover, her arrival announced by the distant rumble of the engine across the plains. She wasn't what most people expected of Kenya's most renowned animal behaviorist. There were no dramatic gestures or mystical rituals. There was simply a profound stillness about her, an aura of patient wisdom that seemed to flow from the red earth of her ancestors. Asha was striking in the way of the Maasai women, tall and graceful, with intricate beadwork adorning her neck and ears. Her hair was braided with red ochre in the traditional style, and her dark eyes held the deep, observant calm of one who had learned the ancient language of wild hearts. She moved with the fluid grace of someone raised among the wildlife of the Great Rift Valley. When Leshan led her to the enclosure and she saw the ghost of a lioness hiding in the shadows, her heart clenched with familiar pain. She watched as a keeper bottle-fed tiny Django, noting how the cub's golden eyes constantly searched for his absent mother. "She won't look at him, won't nurse him," Leshan explained, his voice rough with frustration. "The connection is severed. We can't reach her, and she's wasting away. I fear we'll lose them both, in different ways." Asha stood in contemplation for a long time, her eyes taking in the invisible barrier of trauma that separated mother from child. She could see the wall of fear that Nayeli had built, a fortress too high for a small cub to scale. "The ancestors whisper of an old way," she said finally, her voice carrying the musical cadence of her native Ma language. "It requires patience that spans many sunrises. But love calls to love, even across the deepest wounds." The next morning, Asha entered the enclosure alone. She carried no tools, no food, no modern equipment. In her hands was only a length of indigo cloth, the deep blue of twilight over the savanna, woven by her grandmother's hands decades ago. She walked to the center of the grassland clearing, a respectful distance from Nayeli's sanctuary but in full view of it. She spread the cloth on the earth, arranged herself upon it in the traditional sitting posture of her people, and began to wait. She didn't look toward the hidden grove. She made no sudden movements. She simply became part of the landscape, as constant and natural as the fever trees that dotted the enclosure. For hours, nothing stirred. The equatorial sun warmed her shoulders through her red shukka. The grass whispered ancient secrets in the breeze. Bird calls drifted across the savanna, the trill of the red and yellow barbet, the haunting cry of the crowned crane. From the shadows, she knew she was being studied by traumatized amber eyes. She maintained this vigil for 5 days. Each morning she would arrive with the first light, enter the enclosure, and settle on her indigo cloth until the sun began its descent toward the Mao escarpment. She became as predictable as the sunrise, as constant as the ancient rhythms of the African day. Nayeli remained hidden, a broken queen in her fortress of thorns. On the 6th day, as the morning light painted the grass gold, something shifted. Asha sat cross-legged on her cloth, her shukka draped elegantly around her shoulders, when she caught movement at the edge of her vision. It was Django. The cub had grown stronger on his diet of formula and vitamins, and with strength came courage. He took a tentative step from the shade of his usual resting place, his oversized paws clumsy on the uneven ground. His golden eyes, now fully opened, fixed on the mysterious figure in the clearing. Asha's pulse quickened, but her body remained statue still. She breathed with the rhythm of the earth itself, slow and steady. "Let him come," she whispered in her heart. "Let trust build itself, one step at a time." Django approached with the mixture of caution and curiosity that marked all young predators. He circled the cloth once, his pink nose working to decipher this new scent, human yes, but layered with the smoke of dung fires, the oil of leather, the dust of cattle paths. Sense of life, not death. Then, with the fearless trust of youth, he stepped directly onto the indigo cloth. He approached Asha slowly, sniffing her beadwork, pawing gently at the fringes of her shukka. Finally, he settled against her crossed legs, his warm weight a shock of pure connection, and began to purr, a sound like distant thunder, full of contentment and trust. The feeling was transcendent. This tiny apex predator, this future king of the grasslands, had chosen her as his sanctuary. The vibration of his purr seemed to harmonize with her heartbeat, creating a rhythm older than civilization. She remained perfectly still, her entire being focused on the precious trust in her lap. She could feel the intensity of observation from the hidden grove, sharper now, more focused. Nayeli was watching. For the next week, this became their sacred ritual. Each morning, Django would bound out to greet Asha, settling into her lap for long, purring sessions that seemed to heal something fundamental in both their hearts. To him, she was not human or threat, but simply warmth, safety, and acceptance made manifest. On the 14th day, Asha sensed a change. The eyes in the shadows were no longer just watching, they were studying. Nayeli's magnificent head was no longer pressed low in defeat but lifted with growing awareness, her rounded ears tracking every movement her cub made. She was analyzing this impossible scene, her baby finding peace in human arms. On the 15th day, it happened. Django was drowsing against Asha's chest, his small ribs rising and falling in perfect rhythm with her breathing. The afternoon air was still and warm, heavy with the scent of wild jasmine. The only sounds were the distant calls of vervet monkeys and the rustle of grass in the gentle breeze. Then the grass parted like a golden curtain. Asha felt rather than saw the presence emerging from the grove. Every instinct screamed at her to look, but she kept her gaze soft and indirect. From the corner of her vision, she watched Nayeli materialize from the shadows. The lioness moved with liquid grace despite her trauma, each massive paw placed with infinite care. She was still too thin, but the vacant despair in her eyes had been replaced by sharp, predatory intelligence. She was hunting, not for prey, but for understanding. She stopped 20 meters away, her powerful body held low, every muscle coiled with tension. She was no longer the broken creature from the thorn prison. She was a lioness assessing a situation that defied all her instincts, her cubs sleeping peacefully in human arms. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Asha could feel the weight of that amber gaze, measuring her every breath. She felt Django's warm weight against her chest, this tiny bridge between two worlds, two species, two broken hearts seeking wholeness. Minutes passed like seasons. The lioness was not seeing a threat. She was seeing the being her cub had chosen for comfort, the one who had offered nothing but quiet presence and patient love. Then Asha felt the air change, a subtle shift in the quality of attention. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she turned her head. Nayeli stood just 5 meters away. The proximity sent lightning through Asha's nervous system, but she fought to remain centered in the ancient calm of her ancestors. She could see every detail, the intricate rosette patterns in the golden fur, the white patches around the muzzle, the way the black ear tips twitched with hyper-alert attention. Nayeli looked from Asha's face to the sleeping cub and back again. Her eyes, once hollow with trauma, now held something primordial and profound. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. It was recognition. The acknowledgement that this human posed no threat to what she held most sacred. She had been watching, testing, letting her cub be the scout into unknown territory. Django had shown her that this particular human could be trusted with a lioness's most precious gift, her child's safety. The great cat held her gaze for an eternal moment, then turned and melted back into the tall grass as silently as she had appeared, leaving only the faintest impression in the earth and the memory of wild amber eyes. Asha finally released a breath she hadn't known she was holding, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. It was the breakthrough they had all prayed for. The next day, when Asha settled onto her indigo cloth, she also placed a bowl of fresh antelope meat several meters away. As always, Django came for his daily comfort, purring against her with complete trust. 2 hours later, the grass rustled again. Nayeli emerged with regal caution. She ignored Asha completely, her entire focus on the offered meal. After a long, careful assessment, she crept forward and, for the first time since her rescue, she ate. Not ravenously, but with the delicate precision of a queen, her eyes constantly monitoring the human who held her cub. It was a monumental victory, the first crack in the wall of trauma. From that day forward, the healing accelerated. Nayeli began venturing into the open more frequently, always maintaining her careful distance but clearly observing as Django played around and on his chosen human guardian. She watched him bat at the beaded fringes of Asha's shuka, chase the flowing ends of the indigo cloth, and nap in the security of human arms. One golden afternoon, after Django had exhausted himself playing and fallen asleep across Asha's legs, Nayeli made her move. She approached slowly, ignoring Asha's presence entirely, and bent her massive head to her cub. Her rough tongue began the ancient ritual of grooming, long, careful licks that spoke of reclaimed love. Django stirred, opened his eyes, and saw his mother's face above him. A tiny questioning chirp escaped his throat. In response, Nayeli settled beside him, curling her powerful body around his small form, and began to groom him with the focused intensity of a mother reclaiming her young. Asha sat motionless, tears streaming silently, witness to a miracle older than humanity itself. The severed bond was healing, strand by precious strand. Weeks became months. The indigo cloth became sacred ground for this extraordinary family. Nayeli's coat regained its lustrous golden shine, her body filled out with muscle and health, and the light fully returned to her amber eyes. She remained wary of humans in general, but she had accepted Asha as part of their story, a bridge between her traumatic past and hopeful future. The day came when Leshan and Asha had to discuss the future. "They're both healthy now," Leshan observed, watching the lions in the afternoon sun. Django, now a lanky adolescent with the promise of a magnificent mane beginning to show, playfully stalked his mother's twitching tail. Nayeli responded with a gentle cuff, pure maternal affection in the gesture. "But can they return to the wild?" Asha asked, though she already knew the answer in her heart. "Nayeli's trauma runs deeper than her scars," Asha replied thoughtfully. "She's remembered how to be a mother, but she's forgotten how to be truly wild. She associates safety with this place, with our protection. And Django, he's had too much human contact. The pride would never accept him." The final answer came from Nayeli herself. A few days later, as Asha sat on her cloth reading traditional Maasai stories aloud while Django dozed in a patch of sunlight, the lioness did something that stole Asha's breath entirely. Nayeli walked directly up to her, paused for a moment as if gathering courage, then deliberately rubbed the full length of her massive body against Asha's shoulder and arm. It was the same gesture a house cat might use to show affection, but coming from this 140-kilogram apex predator, this resurrected queen of the savannah, it was a declaration of trust more profound than any human words could convey. Then she settled in the grass between Asha and Django, a bridge between worlds, protector and companion, and closed her golden eyes in perfect contentment. The decision was made in that sacred moment. They would stay. The Conservation Trust expanded their habitat into a vast territory of grassland and acacia groves, a true slice of wild Africa where they could live out their days in dignity and safety. Nayeli would never again face the cruelty of poachers, and Django would grow into his majesty under the watchful eye of the mother he had helped save. Asha continued her visits, though less frequently as the bond between mother and son strengthened into an unbreakable force of nature. Sometimes she would simply stand at the observation point and watch them. Django, now nearly full-grown, practicing his hunting stalks in the tall grass, and Nayeli, sleek and powerful, watching him from her favorite termite mound, the very picture of a proud lioness mother. The indigo cloth was eventually retired to a place of honor in Asha's home, its purpose fulfilled. But she knew its threads were woven into the fabric of this miracle, a story of how patient presence, a cub's innocent trust, and a mother's indestructible love could heal even the deepest wounds carved by human cruelty. In the end, it was not conquest that saved them, but surrender. Not dominance, but stillness. Not force, but the ancient African wisdom that sometimes, love finds its way home through the most unexpected paths. And in the golden grasslands of the Maasai Mara, under the endless African sky, a lioness and her cub continue to write their story, a testament to the healing power of patient love and the unbreakable bonds that connect all living hearts.